The events of this story take place in Russia in February 1884, when Mr. William was residing there due to his work. Mr. William was living with his wife, Anna. The couple lived in a small house consisting of only 2 rooms. The first was the bedroom, and the second was the office. Mr. William always used it during the daytime hours, because he sleeps early to go to work, and therefore he never stays up late and does not like to work at night. Mrs. Anna gave birth to her young child 3 days ago, and it was difficult for both of them to take care of the little one. And for this reason, Mr. William and his wife hired a Russian nanny who was recommended to them by one of Mr. William's colleagues at work. Mr. William intended to help his wife with the child, but after 2 days had passed, he felt very tired, especially. He does not sleep because the child is screaming, and he cannot take care of his wife, the child, and the house at the same time. Here came the role of the nanny, who was necessary at that stage to help the couple and take care of the child, especially since she had previous experience. And for this reason, Mrs. Anna could benefit from her experience in care with her little child. 3 days after the baby was born, Mr. William agreed with his wife Anna that Mr. William would go to sleep outside the bedroom because the baby's crying would prevent him from sleeping well. Unfortunately, the apartment is small and does not have a large number of rooms. Even the nanny who lives with the family sleeps in the part designated for receiving guests, and for this reason there was no place left for Mr. William to sleep except the office room. Mr. William felt hesitant because he was originally afraid of that room, as he often found things that had moved from their places or some things that had changed their positions, but he refused to admit it and ignore all those things. And this is exactly what he told himself when he went to sleep in that room. He had to sleep after the fatigue of the past days in order to be able to go to work in the morning. Indeed, the first and second nights passed peacefully, but on the third night, there was something inside Mr. William telling him not to sleep in that room, but he did not have any alternative solutions. He had to go in and sleep in the room, and Mr. William was telling himself that he had previously slept in that room twice, and nothing had happened, and therefore nothing would happen. Mr. William was a deep sleeper, and once he went to sleep, he did not wake up until the morning. Even if there were sounds around him, he did not wake up until he got the sufficient amount of sleep that he needed. On the third night, after Mr. William went to the office, he sat on the sofa facing the windows of the room. The room had 3 large wooden windows. Mr. William began arranging the sofa to sleep on, and then he looked at his watch and found that it was nearly 10 o'clock, and therefore he had to sleep immediately. And Mr. William actually stretched his body on the sofa and pulled the blanket to cover his body and immediately fell into a deep sleep. The sleep was peaceful, without dreams or nightmares. Suddenly, Mr. William woke up and looked at his watch again and found that he had only slept for 30 minutes. But he didn't understand why he woke up from his sleep, and here he heard a voice coming from afar, weakly whispering, "Willie." Lady Anna was the only one who used this name, and that is why Mr. William got up from his place, remembering what happened yesterday when the nanny needed help and his wife called him to help her. And he actually went to the nanny and carried the child for her, and that is why he thought that the nanny needed help again. So Mr. William ran from the room quickly, and here he did not hear any sounds. He went to the nanny's sleeping place and found her sleeping, and there were no sounds coming from the bedroom, so he returned to the office room where the sofa he would sleep on. As soon as he entered the room, he found a person in front of one of the windows. He thought that this person was his wife. Perhaps she entered while he was outside the room. There was a body standing in front of the window and looking outside. Mr. William did not know whether it was his wife or not, but he was sure that there was someone standing in front of him. And here he extended his hand towards the table in the room without taking his eyes off the person standing in front of him. Mr. William put his hand on the matchbox that was in front of him. Then he took out one of the matches and lit it. As soon as he lit it, he did not find anything in front of him or in front of the window. Mr. William felt very frightened and immediately left the room and headed to his wife's room. He stood in front of the door of the room hesitating, but when he heard the little boy crying, he knew that the child was still awake. Here he knocked on the door for his wife and entered to find her sitting in front of him, and it seemed that she was still awake and had not slept, and that is why he decided to tell her what happened. Mr. William told everything to his wife, who listened to him intently, and then she also felt afraid. She also had terrifying experiences with that room, as during her pregnancy she suffered from insomnia, and when she passed in front of the room, she listened to the sounds of unintelligible whispers. It seemed to be in Russian, but she always convinced her mind that all this was just fantasies, that her mind was playing tricks on her, and that was why she did not want to say anything to her husband. Therefore, when her husband told her what had happened, she did not lie to him, but rather asked him not to go into the room and to sleep that night next to her in their bed. But it seemed that Mr. William was very tired and wanted to sleep away from the screaming of the little one, and that is why he refused the offer and told her that he was most likely tired and did not see anything, and he is just imagining, so he will go to sleep in the room as if nothing had happened. His wife agreed despite her fear and certainty that he was never imagining. Mr. William went to the room again and looked at the window and found that there was light snow rain, so he returned again to the sofa and then decided to go back to sleep. Mr. William quickly fell into a deep sleep, but again he slept without any dreams. But after a number of hours, specifically at the 2 in the morning, he woke up again to the whispering sound of a woman saying, "Willie." Here, Mr. William woke up again to find in front of the window the same thing he had seen before. The room was dark, and the lighting entering through the window was rather strong, and Mr. William needed some time for his eyes to get used to the light in order to distinguish what is in front of him. And indeed, his eyes began to get used to the light, and here he noticed that this person or thing standing in front of the window is the body of a woman. He thought it was his wife. She may have entered the room to check on him, but he also noticed that she was shorter than his wife, and she was also taller than the nanny and therefore not her. Mr. William looked closely and noticed that this thing was not standing on the ground, but was rising in the air, and here Mr. William did not understand what to do. Although Mr. William clearly saw that what was in front of him was not something normal, he refused to give in to this idea, so he got up from his place, grabbed the blanket, and headed to the window while raising the blanket with both hands. He was imagining that he was going to close in on this person using the blanket. When he began to move, he noticed that this person was moving in the same direction and approaching him. Here, Mr. William quickened his steps until he reached the place of this person. But instead of holding him, he found himself crossing through him. He felt the cold air penetrating his entire body, and of course he lost his balance and fell in front of the window. He looked behind him and did not find anything. He felt that his heart was going to stop due to the intensity and speed of its beating, and he began to sweat even though the weather was very cold. And here he could not stand, so he began to move on his hands and feet until he reached the door of the room and left it. And here he leaned on the wall. He stood up and headed straight to his wife's room. He was walking with small steps because he was still shaking because of what he had seen and felt minutes before. He approached the door of the room and heard the little boy crying inside, and here he decided to enter his wife again. As soon as he entered the room, his wife noticed his appearance and he was horrible. It was clear that he felt afraid, as drops of sweat were falling from his face and his hair was completely wet. Mrs. Anna tried to calm him down, and he actually calmed down and told her everything that happened in the room. He felt strange because she believed him, but she assured him that that room made her afraid, and she did not like being there in it or near it. And Mrs. Anna decided to ask Mr. William to sleep that night in the bedroom and not to go to the office again. William tried to sleep, but he was very distracted, and here he remembered that the voice that was whispering to him, Willie, in the room, was with a Russian accent, not an English one. After much thought, William went back to sleep again, and this time he did not wake up again until the morning. William's mind was confused all day because of the previous night and what had happened to him, and he denied for the third time that what had happened had happened. Rather, he kept convincing himself that he was dreaming or perhaps imagining, and that night William returned home intending to sleep in the office again. Mrs. Anna tried to stop him and persuade him to sleep in the bedroom, but he completely refused and insisted on sleeping in the office room, as if he was challenging himself. Indeed, in the evening, Mr. William went into the room and prepared the sofa for him to sleep on. There was something inside Mr. William telling him to stay in the office in order to ascertain whether that woman was just an illusion or whether she was real and was actually visiting him every night. Mr. William fell into a deep sleep on time, and after hours he woke up to the same voice whispering, Willie. Mr. William quickly paid attention and tried to be fully awake and to focus on what was happening in front of him. And here he noticed that the entity that was whispering his name actually existed and was not imaginings. It was a woman whose features did not appear clear due to the darkness, but it was clear that she was standing and waiting for someone at the window. William kept watching her without moving from his place, as if he was waiting for her to do anything, but she just stood there without moving or doing anything, just staring at the window. Mr. William did not feel the time. He was just watching that lady watching the window, and then Mr. William fell into a deep sleep and did not wake up until the morning. The next day, his wife asked him if he had seen anything yesterday, told her that he had not seen anything, and this was because he wanted to reassure her that everything was fine and that there was nothing to be afraid of. In the evening, Mr. William went to the room to sleep, and he knew that he would wake up to the sound of that woman calling, "Willie." This is what actually happened, but this time he tried to stay awake for a longer period of time, and he noticed that that woman was crying in a low voice while staring at the window. William felt that that lady was probably the sad soul of one of the old owners of the house, and here he thought about how he could act without drawing his wife's attention that there was something wrong in the house. He did not want to concern his wife with that matter, because he knew that if his wife knew that her fears were real and that there was indeed a certain spirit inhabiting their apartment, would not want to continue living in that apartment any longer. And here Mr. William remembered the previous owner of the apartment and contacted him in order to ask him about the apartment and that woman. Indeed, Mr. William agreed to meet the old owner of the apartment that day and spoke to him about apartment matters in general, but the man knew that this interview had other reasons than what Mr. William was talking about, and he was right in this. William began talking about the strange things that he and his wife felt in the apartment, and about the woman that William saw standing in front of the window without saying anything. The owner of the apartment looked at him suspiciously and told him that he doubted that this matter was real. William did not understand what the man meant, so the old owner of the apartment began to tell William that he and his wife had been lived in that apartment for years, but they were both sleeping in the bedroom, and one day, his wife's sister visited them and slept in that room, but she woke up in the middle of the night crying and began raving with many incomprehensible words. After she calmed down, she told them about a ghost that appeared to her in the room and was standing in front of the window. She thought that he was a thief and entered to steal the house. That night, neither he nor his wife nor her sister slept. Early in the morning, her sister left and did not visit the house again. The couple suspected that these were illusions or perhaps dreams, but there were certainly no ghosts in the house. Years passed, and the couple decided to leave the house, and it was sold to William and Anna. William was sure that he was right, and that what he actually saw was the ghost of a woman, or perhaps her spirit wandering around the place, but he wanted to understand more about the matter, so he asked the old owner of the apartment to give him any information about the apartment or its history. And here the old owner told him that he had bought that apartment from a British businessman, gave him his name. From that day on, William began searching for the name that his previous apartment owner had given him, but he discovered that this man had already traveled to Britain and had no longer lived in Russia for years. As the New Year holidays approached, the small family of Mr. William and his wife Anna decided to travel to Britain to spend that period. The journey was difficult and long, especially with the baby, but they finally arrived in London and went to William's family home. Everyone welcomed them warmly, especially since this was the first time in which they meet the little boy, which is why everyone was excited and eager to see him and William and Anna. The next evening, William went to meet a friend at the bar. His name was Michael. He started talking to him about the past period and all the things that had surprised him in Russia. His friend was very excited about what he heard from William, but this enthusiasm doubled once William told him about the ghost of the woman who lives in his apartment, and he sees her every time he sleeps in the office room. William told him the name of the man who owned the original apartment and who also lives in Britain. Michael asked William to give him the name of the man so he could start searching for him. William gave him the man's name, but he was certain that Michael would not reach him. It is not easy, but within 2 days, Michael went to William at his family's house and told him that he wanted to go out with him. While they were outside, Michael told him that he had found the man he was looking for and had obtained an appointment from him, and that this appointment was an hour from now, and here they set off. They both went to the man's house, and when William entered, he found that he was in a large palace, and that in front of him was a man who seemed very rich. William spoke about himself to the man and told him about his apartment in Russia and what was happening there. He told him that he got his name from the old owner of the apartment, and here the man looked at William in shock and began to cry silently and tell what happened. The man said that he was at the beginning of his business career and had more than one partner who convinced him to travel and start in Russia. Indeed, the man traveled there and started working. The business was good, and he was achieving continuous success. There he met his wife, Sasha. She was a beautiful woman and loved him very much. They got married. Within months of their first meeting, they soon gave birth to their little boy, William. William was a beautiful and intelligent child, but he loved to go out, and Sasha was trying to please him all the time, especially since her husband was absent, and that is why she would often leave him playing in the garden in front of the house. She used to stand in front of the window to watch William. She liked to call him Willie, because as soon as he heard her, he would rush into the house. Those were her rules, and she applied them firmly. One day, while William was playing in the garden, he disappeared within seconds. Sasha was looking at him. When she went to get tea and came back to look again, she did not find him. She imagined that he had moved away and would return shortly, but he did not return. She felt very afraid and went out to the garden, searching and calling for him. "Willie, Willie," but he never answered her. Hours later, the husband arrived and saw his wife crying. He was terrified for little William, and he immediately informed the police of William's disappearance, and everyone began searching for him. But unfortunately, 2 days later, they found William murdered in one of the parks near the house. Meanwhile, Sasha fell into severe depression and would stay for days in front of the window, watching what was happening outside, as if she was waiting William to return. And her husband often heard her calling Willie in the late hours of the night, and he tried to calm her down, but to no avail. The husband sent her to a psychiatric hospital, and she was placed there for a while, but when she came out, she was worse than before, and she also did not move from the room or in front of the window. And one day, the husband woke up to the sound of a cup breaking. When he entered the room where Sasha was sitting, he found her dead on the chair in front of the window. It seemed that she had put something in her drink in order to get rid of her life. The husband sat in that apartment for several months after Sasha's death, but he always heard her voice calling Willie, which made him fear that he too was suffering from depression. Here, he decided to sell that apartment and return to Britain again. And indeed, he returned to Britain and no longer listened to the voice of his dead wife, Sasha, again. And when he returned to Britain, he remained without marriage for years. But then he decided to get married and have more children, and his life continued completely normally. The meeting between William and the original owner of the apartment ended. William was feeling very sad for Sasha and for what had happened to her child, and he understood the sadness that had driven her to kill herself, as that loss was never easy. William didn't know what to do. Should he tell his wife, or doesn't he tell her? Can he stay in that apartment after everything he's heard and known, or should he sell it? The vacation ended, and the family returned to Russia again. And here, William also went back to sleep in his office. He woke up every day to the sound of Sasha calling Willie, but he looked at her sadly, left her, and went back to sleep again. This continued as it was for years, until Mr. Williams' family found out Anna was pregnant again. And here he decided to look for another apartment to move into, because that apartment was very small and not suitable for his family. He felt some guilt because he would sell the apartment knowing about the ghost that lived in it, but he had no other solutions. Fortunately, the apartment was sold to a company that turned it into offices. The offices were used only during day, not at night, and this made Mr. William feel comfortable and reassured.